What happens when a legendary actor loses his cool on live television? In just 42 seconds, Michael Caine went from charming guest to walking off the Loose Women set in what's being called the most explosive moment in daytime TV history. Before we dive into this absolute mess, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Last night's episode of Loose Women was supposed to be a celebration. Michael Caine, the iconic British actor known for his calm demeanor and legendary career, was sitting across from the panel to talk about his latest projects. The show had been promoted all week. Viewers tuned in expecting charm, wit, and those famous stories from Hollywood's golden age. But what started as friendly banter quickly turned into something nobody saw coming. The studio lights were bright, almost too bright, casting everything in that artificial glow that makes daytime television feel both intimate and exposed. The audience was packed, every seat filled with people excited to see a legend in person. Coffee mugs sat on the panel's table, steam still rising from them. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly safe. Michael sat comfortably in his chair, wearing a smart blazer, looking every bit the distinguished gentleman. That familiar voice of his filled the room as he chatted with the hosts, telling a funny story about working on one of his early films. The audience laughed at all the right moments. The other panelists smiled and nodded. It was exactly what everyone had expected. Denise Welch, never one to shy away from controversy, was leading the conversation. She'd been warm and welcoming at first, asking about his career, complimenting his recent work. But anyone who knows Denise knows that's usually just the warm-up. She smiled at him, leaning forward with that look she gets when she's about to ask something provocative. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, and if you were watching closely, you could see her whole posture change. "Michael, we've got to address something," Denise said, her tone shifting slightly. The smile was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't warm anymore. It had become something else, something sharper. "There's been a lot of talk recently about some of your older films and certain scenes that, by today's standards, might be considered problematic. Some people have been calling them outright inappropriate, offensive even." The shift in the room was immediate and palpable. You could feel it like a temperature drop, like someone had opened a window in winter. The other panelists glanced at each other with expressions that said they hadn't been briefed on this line of questioning. Their eyes went wide. One of them subtly shook her head, as if to say, "Don't go there." The audience went from relaxed and entertained to alert and uncomfortable. You could hear the shuffle of people adjusting in their seats. Michael's expression didn't change much at first, but if you looked closely, if you really watched his face, you could see something flicker in his eyes, a warning sign. A flash of something that said, "Careful now." He adjusted in his seat, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate slowness, maintaining that professional composure he's known for, that he's perfected over decades in the public eye. "Well, Denise," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, the way someone walks through a minefield. "I think we have to understand the context of when those films were made. Different times, different sensibilities. The world was a very different place 30, 40, 50 years ago. Society had different norms, different expectations." It was a diplomatic answer, the kind he'd probably given 100 times before in various interviews over the years. The standard response. The safe response. The response that usually makes interviewers nod and move on to the next question. But Denise wasn't going to let it slide that easily. "Oh no, this was just the beginning." "Context," she repeated, nodding slowly like she was considering his words very carefully. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, focused, hunting. That's an interesting word. Context. People love to use that word, don't they? But don't you think, as someone with your influence, someone who's been looked up to by millions of people around the world, someone who shaped how people see the world through your films, you have a responsibility to acknowledge when things were wrong, when things crossed a line, when things caused harm? Michael uncrossed his legs and leaned forward slightly.